Bonjour à tous.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. So thank you for coming this afternoon. Thank you for coming to this opening conference for the 2013 edition of the European Lab. So this is the third edition. I'd like to say a few words about that in a few minutes' time, but first and foremost, I'd like to hand over to Gérard, who is Senator Mayor of Lyon and President of the Greater Lyon Authority, who is working on us here today for this session of the European Labs 2013. Yes, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very happy to be with you this afternoon, and I'm delighted to be here for several reasons. First of all, because we have the presence of Joschka Fischer with us here today. And I think that if I were to situate myself in terms of proximity, Joschka Fischer is somebody who I feel very close to. I feel close to him first and foremost because I believe that we both share the same passion for Europe, and that we both think that today the future resides with Europe. And if there is a crisis in our countries, it's not because we have too much Europe, it's because we don't have enough of Europe. And I think that we need a political Europe which is strong enough and which can give us extra meaning and give extra meaning to the economic and monetary union which exists today. So Joschka Fischer is a European federalist, and I feel very close to him and to this school of thought that he represents here today, and also the European Labs event. So this is a European Lab event which takes place in the framework of this festival, and it's a place for us to think about urban culture. So this is another one of my passions. Europe is my first passion, but my second passion is a passion for cities and urban life. And I think the world of the future is going to be invented through our cities, and we are going to have this cultural dialogue created in our cities and between our cities and between our different countries in the world. And in the same way as in Europe of the 16th century, it was in the cities where we invented culture, humanism, and civilization as we know it. I think it's through this dialogue on urban culture throughout the world that we're going to be inventing the civilization of the future, in particular through the laboratories, such as the laboratory we're organizing here today. And I've looked at the main aspects that you're going to be talking about: culture, business, the media, and politics. And I think it's through these four dimensions that we can map out the future. But culture, in fact, sums this all up in itself, because you know that the exchange and the trading in the cities in the 16th century produced culture, and it was in fact this trade which produced culture. But in addition to this trading between cities in the 16th century, when men and women came together, a lot of things happened. So there was this dialogue which was struck up between different civilizations and dialogue between these different cultures, and this is how people go about inventing the civilizations of the future. So I'm very happy to welcome you here, and also I'm very happy to host the Nuits Sonores for their 11th edition of this event here in Lyon. Now, a few years ago, I remember when I started out as mayor of Lyon, we remember making this crazy wager. This was a day we decided we were going to give 250,000 euros to a young team called Arty Farty so that they could organize this festival, Les Nuits Sonores. And it was a crazy wager at the time, but nonetheless, this wager has paid off, and they've really reaped the fruit of that wager. So I'm very happy to be with them every year. So thank you very much for coming. So thank you very much, Mayor, for this introduction. I'd like to say a few words about the laboratories here and also the program for this first conference. So first of all, I'd like to say that I'm delighted to welcome Joschka Fischer, who this year is our guest of honor. And we received Jeremy Rifkin last year in this same room to open this laboratory session. Now, the laboratories, this is an event that we organized 3 years ago. So it's a professional event that we've created on the fringe of the Nuits Sonores Festival. So Gérard has just reminded you that we're celebrating the 11th edition of the Nuits Sonores Festival this year, and we have a lot of professionals present at the Nuits Sonores. About 1,200 professionals are present here, so we didn't really know how to bring them together, and we didn't really know what to offer them, really, particularly for the first editions of Les Nuits Sonores. So we decided to create this professional meeting for European professionals, which would be on the fringe of Les Nuits Sonores, so as to capitalize on this professional presence from across the whole of Europe. So in the Nuit Sonore Festival. There are so many people here who manage festivals, for example, who manage labels, record labels, and also who manage innovative companies in the field of digital technologies, video gaming, also graphics and visual creation, and so on and so forth. So we wanted to bring together all of these stakeholders who are involved in this field. And one of our intentions was clearly stated right from the first edition of these European laboratories, which was in fact to create an arena for all of these young European stakeholders involved in culture so that they could rethink the cultural models and policies for the next 10, 15, 20 years. Why? Because a lot of things have happened since, well, over the last 10 or 20 years, and obviously these have created some big changes in the world of culture. First of all, we had the digital revolution which came about. This has brought in some major changes in how we create work, how we share this work, how we distribute this work, and also how people consume this work. So that was one massive revolution. And then the second major change, which is an ancillary change, has been the globalization of cultural behavior. So this is something that we've seen in electronic culture, for example, because the artists on the electronic scene internationally are probably the most advanced when it comes to how they're able to work in a transcontinental and a cross-border manner, and how they're always spearheading what's going on in Johannesburg from Berlin, or what's going on in Chile, and how they know about artists from South America and who have minimalist techno music that we used to listen to in Frankfurt. So that's what this culture is all about, and I think this is what culture is all about in general today. And also cultural policy, because at governmental level, cultural policy tends to be thought out in terms of models and cultural realities, which sometimes haven't taken account of this dual revolution that's taken place. So I think this raises a whole series of challenges that have to be discussed and overcome. And I'm very happy that we've been able to create this forum for free expression beyond this institutional framework. And nonetheless, we're in an institution here. We're in the City Hall of Lyon. We could have organized this event in an industrial wasteland, but we decided to do it in the City Hall here so that this non-institutional and independent discourse, in fact, would be act as a counterweight to institutions. So we didn't want to create this kind of anarchical space where what we say is not going to be taken up and shared with people who belong to these institutions. So that's why we created this European Laboratories event. And for a week, we're going to be discussing all of these issues. We're going to be discussing things with about 150 stakeholders from Europe and beyond, because we have people here from all continents. And we're doing this thanks to a certain number of partners who I'd now like to quote. The European Union, first and foremost, which has agreed to support this project and has done so right from the start. The CNR, which is the Rhone National Company, which is our leading partner and the founding partner of these European laboratories. And today, this conference is being organized in partnership with the Gaîté Institute, with which we have a very friendly and professional relationship, and this has been the case for many years. And above all, I'd like to really thank Libération, the daily paper, which has been an extremely important partner for us throughout the years. So I'd really like to greet Nicolas Demorand, who's going to join us in a few moments after Joschka Fischer's intervention, because he's going to have a discussion with Joschka Fischer as well, and he's going to be moderating this meeting with you for all the questions that you have to put to Joschka Fischer. So Libération is a very important partner for us, because they really act as a sounding board for everything we do nationally, and this is extremely important for us to have this sounding board. And also all the politicians from France now. Unfortunately, not everybody reads the tabloid press or the paper press nowadays, but a lot of people read Libération, I hope, or at least on internet, and you'll see that Libération is going to be taking up some of the discussions that we're having here in the third edition of this laboratory. Also, we're going to be talking about cultural entrepreneurship. We have a lot of business managers present here. We're going to be talking with Stephen Hearn about this, who I'd like to greet as well, who has been commissioned by the Ministry of Culture to give us some new ideas on these cultural businesses and their role in future years. We're going to be talking about the music industry as well, obviously, and we hope that we would have the conclusions of the Lescure Commission before the laboratory. And it so happens that miraculously, in fact, they were adjourned to the 13th of May. So the 200 people who were concerned by this at European level, unfortunately, will not be able to discuss the conclusions of the Lescure report, but nonetheless, we can do some forward thinking on what the conclusions of this report might be. We know that there are already 75 conclusions. It's already a good start. And then we're going to be talking about cultural policy. Obviously, we have a round table that we've called called disconnection. So the idea is to talk about cultural institutions and to think about whether the cultural institutions are in phase with the digital revolution. We're going to be talking about the link between Europe and the United States. We're going to be talking about the record industry, obviously, and we're going to be talking about a whole series of different subjects. And above all, we're going to be listening to a lot of testimonials. So we have an event every day called Storytelling with founders of cultural projects. It's going to be very important, very symbolic. For example, there's the founder of Burning Man in the US, also the DFA label, the Sonar Festival in Barcelona, the Trans Musical Festival in Rennes. So all of these people who've been at the source of these great culture endeavors, and they're going to explain why they did this, what convictions they had, and what passion they have. And this is what drives us all forward, passion, this passion for culture, this passion for innovation, and this passion for music. So thank you very much for being here. And I'm happy that there are so many people in this room to listen to Joschka Fischer. And without further ado, I'm going to hand him the floor.
Well, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure and honor to be invited to this beautiful city of Lyon. With such a marvelous audience here in this beautiful room. Allow me to begin with a personal remark. I have to apologize, not to speak French. I was a lousy student, but I made a terrible mistake not to learn French. I decided for Latin. I never learned Latin. But the problem is I can't speak the language in a way that it would be helpful, that you could understand me, so we decided to speak English. It's a great pleasure to address the issue of Europe, especially on this very day, May the 8th. It's hard to speak about Europe without understanding European history. Europe is the continent of history, and to understand the European problems, the different mentalities, it's impossible to do that without a deeper insight into European history. If you look to this building, it's all history. And this happens not only in France, it happens in my country, it happens everywhere, in all member states of the European Union. So history matters for the European identity, and history is also one of the biggest problems we are dealing with nowadays in forming a united Europe, because history unites us and history separates us. And especially on this very day, May the 8th, I think it's important to understand what happened. 68 years ago, it was the end of the Nazi German Reich. It was the beginning of a new Europe. And we should be very grateful that at that time great leaders were in charge to design a new European reality. Nazism was barbaric. It was the worst what European history produced in the 20th century. Terrible crimes, terrible devastation, wars. And on the other side, there was a generation on May the 8th, 1945, not only in Europe, but also in the United States of America, great statesmen who understood the lessons of history and understood that this cannot go on. Europe was divided in the following decades between East and West. And next year we will have another very important memorial date on November 9th, in August, July, August, the beginning of the First World War. But we shouldn't forget that also this war, the First World War, ended on November 9th, 1918, Armistice Day. But it was also the night when the wall came down in 1989 in Berlin. And since then, the world is changing dramatically. We had a period after 1945 where a new Europe was emerging. And what was the essence of the new Europe? The essence of the new Europe was to say farewell to the centuries of war and to move into a new era of cooperation, even more of integration. And the core of this new Europe was that the enemies, the old enemies, France and Germany, overcame the hate, overcame these legacy of wars, and started a new chapter. And this was the beginning, not in 1957, but much earlier, that France and Germany, West Germany at that time, were opening a new chapter which laid the foundation of Europe, of the European Union as we know it today. I know young people think, okay, grandpa, I'm a grandpa nowadays, grandpa is talking about war. War is not any longer reality in Europe. I think they are right. But to understand what we are talking about when we talk about Europe, we can't forget history, even as young people. You can't forget the reasons why Europe developed and why it's so precious. And if we lose this European project, we would make a terrible historical mistake. And it will depend on France and Germany, especially in this very moment of the European crisis. So from that point of view, ladies and gentlemen, we made tremendous progress. The first time I was in France was, I think, 1964. At that time, France was a different country. There were borders, there was still the generation of the Second World War, or even of the First World War alive. Only a few years have passed since the end of the Second World War and the defeat of Nazism in Germany. But even then, you could sense, and I was at that time not a grandpa, but a young man, that there was an atmosphere of a new beginning. And this new beginning was based on the Elysee Treaty, on the Treaty of Rome. It was the experience of a new country. At that time, France was a country far away from me, a brand new experience. And since then, we have made together tremendous progress. So, ladies and gentlemen, when we talk about Europe today, we have to understand that our Europe, which we are used to nowadays, is embedded in a world which is changing very quickly. It's not only about to understand the history, it's not only about that we shouldn't forget that war defined the European history, and especially between our two nations. We must understand, and especially the young people here in the room must understand, your life will be defined by changes which are taking now, which are happening now in the world. Usually our American cousins are telling us Europe is the old continent. But compared to China, we are still young. So old and young is not the issue. The issue is whether we are ready, whether we are able to act together in the 21st century. And this will be the question for the future, whether we are speaking French, German, Dutch, Polish, whatever. Because with Chinese eyes, with Indian eyes, with American eyes, we are Europeans. And the question is not whether we have our historical disputes or our rivalries or whatever. With Chinese, American, Indian eyes, this looks only crazy. We are seen as Europeans, and we are treated as Europeans. And the question will be whether we are strong or weak. This will be the question in the 21st century. This will decide about the jobs of the younger generation. This will be the key question. And we are living still in a very challenging environment. Look to the Middle East. Look to the Maghreb, the Sahel zone. What will happen in Russia tomorrow? This is our neighborhood, a very challenging neighborhood. Our American cousins have problems enough at home. They will look to the Pacific Rim. We are used to the division of labor that we are criticizing the Americans, but once we need them, they will be there. No? For the future, I think the Europeans have to invest more into their own interests. Are we able to invest more in our own interests? That's the key question. It's not a question of France or Germany or Italy or Spain or Poland. It's a question for all of us. And if you want to talk about the future of France without Europe, or of Germany without Europe, it's not possible. Think about if the euro would collapse and suddenly we would have, again, our national currencies. Oh, the Chinese and the Americans will be really impressed. Really. I mean, it would be sheer madness. So in the present crisis, what I hear are nationalist voices. But where is the voice of the pro-Europeans? And don't say the situation is too complicated. The situation after May the 8th, 1945, the situation for the generation of Charles de Gaulle, of Konrad Adenauer, was much more complicated than our situation. What our grandparents and parents had to fix was much more complicated. So from that point of view, ladies and gentlemen, the question of the future of Europe, especially for the younger generation, is the key question. If we will lose Europe, it would be a situation of rien ne va plus for all of us. We shouldn't forget that. Life will continue, of course. And I don't believe that war will come back. Europeans are not powerful enough anymore to be a serious threat to the world. But others will decide, and we will be forced to implement this decision. Do we want this? Is that the future for our children and grandchildren? We think it's the right one? I doubt. And therefore, I think we have really to do the utmost to go ahead with in these European crises and create a strong Europe. Now, what does that mean, ladies and gentlemen? I think at the moment there are a lot of negative feelings in Europe. Now I hear ideas of a Latin Union. Before I heard in my own country the idea of a Northern Currency Union. It's completely denying the core of Europe, the Franco-German relationship. If we would allow that France and Germany would stay in different camps again, we would have lost 60 years of European integration. Because overcoming this confrontation between our two nations is the real core of European integration. So we shouldn't allow new divisions in Europe. And we shouldn't pursue policies which are encouraging these new divisions. I say that to whom it may concern, even if it is my own government. So from that point of view, ladies and gentlemen, Europe is today in a situation where we were passing through a river without a bridge. And in the middle of the river, a huge wave came down the river and hit us. And we have two options, or three, but only two will work. Either we are swimming back where we are coming from. This means renationalization. From my point of view, a disaster for Europe, but we can do it. Or we are swimming to the other shore. It means a real integration of Europe, especially in the Eurozone, going into mutualization of debt, going into political union, because this is very closely linked. Mutualization of debt is in Germany a no, no, no. Political union is in France a no, 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 no. That's the problem. But we have to address this issue between France and Germany and together with all our other partners in the currency union, in the Eurozone. Or we can have the illusion to stay where we are, swimming in the middle of the flood. But this is suicidal. So from that point of view, ladies and gentlemen, I think we have to go ahead. And this needs leadership and tough political decisions. But it needs especially a debate between France and Germany. And to be understood in the correct way, we are different. We have a different culture. France has a centralized culture, we have a decentralized culture. We always think the other side is going in the wrong direction. I once asked Minister Lemaire, when you sit together in your ministry or in the LSE and talking about us, the Germans, what do you think what is your major concern, or what drives you crazy about us? The answer was, you always want to have the decision making. You always want to have the saying. So I burst out in laughter and said, exactly that, we think about you too. This will not change, ladies and gentlemen. And I experienced that for many years. But if it's done in the right way, it's extremely constructive and productive. Europe has gained a lot by these Franco-German contradictions if it's organized in the right way. But we shouldn't forget, if we are not on the same, in the same boat, this will block Europe and create nothing positive. Therefore, from that point of view, I think it's very important that not only the governments, it's by then complicated between president and chancellor, I experienced that too, but we shouldn't rely only on governments. I'm so concerned about the silence in the media and between the civil societies. I think this is a serious problem, and we shouldn't underestimate that without an honest discourse between the two societies, between the intellectuals, politicians, public opinions, I think it will be very, very complicated to overcome the present crisis, because there are a lot of misunderstandings or conflict of interest. And therefore, we should think about one element I'm thinking about now for some years, since the French referendum about the Constitution. In the French referendum about the Constitution, which ended in a no, as you know, the majority of the voters under 30 was against the Constitution. And even today, I think it's even more serious with unemployment in some member states, with 50% and more in the young generation. I think it's even more complicated. But there, something must have happened. Because Europe was always a positive issue for the youth, for my generation, and some younger. It were the young Europeans who were pushing forward, together with great statesmen. So what has changed? I think we have lost the European narrative. We didn't develop a European narrative based on the new realities. My generation trusted to the narrative which we're used to. Europe was constructed against wars. But after the end of the Cold War, with the beginning of enlargement of the European Union, with the creation of a bigger Europe, with the globalization, rise of China and other emerging markets, a very fast changing world, we have lost the narrative. And honestly, today Europe is seen as a bureaucratic construction, but nothing which is coming from the heart, nothing which touches you. This is my explanation why so many young people who are living Europe, they are not against Europe, they live Europe every day, are in the moment of a political decision more drawn to the Eurosceptics and the non-Europeans than to Europe. This must change. And I think the new narrative must address the issues, the challenges of the future, more than the challenges of the past. And it must also address, I think, the huge opportunity which Europe offers. We are united and diverse. Diversity is part of Europe. If you are going to the United States, you will see, they are also diverse, but not in our way. Our nations are more or less 1,000 years old. We have our own languages, cultures, historical narratives, prejudices. So we are diverse. And this offers a great opportunity. And I think the new narrative must also rely and focus on this diversity. And their culture plays a very important role. Now, high culture is by definition transnational. It would make no sense to have only the opera written by citizens of one nation. Of course, the Italians would be there in a positive position, but it would be mad. High culture is per definition transnational. But the popular culture will play a very important role. As long as the popular culture is not moving into this new reality, I think we will have serious problems to overcome the existing crisis. So from that point of view, especially to the young people, I want to say, Europe is a huge opportunity. And it's also an opportunity to connect to other cultures. One of the greatest inventions, unfortunately now with the budget reduction it will be reduced, one of the greatest inventions, ladies and gentlemen, of the EU is the Erasmus program. The opportunity to study for 1 year, funded by the European Union, outside of your own country. I think it's a very bad idea to reduce this program. I would be strongly in favor not only to have such a program for the academic youth, but also for those who are in vocal training, who are in the job, who are not at the university, to create a broader exchange, an understanding of the diversity and unity of the European reality. Culture plays an important role, popular culture. And popular culture needs space. It's not only about money. Money is always good. Allow me to say that in front of the mayor, deputy mayor, and representative for culture politics. Money helps a lot, but it's limited. What young people need is space, the possibility where they can be really creative. I think if the European Union would spend, I wouldn't say 1%, but 0.5 or 0.4% of the agriculture budget, it would help a lot. No? Why not? Oh, don't worry, don't worry. Young farmers would enjoy that. Believe me, it's once you are young, whether you are living in the countryside or not, some issues which are more important than farm subsidies. So, but of course, also regional. We should be fair, not only farmers, regional structural funds, cohesion funds, whatever. I mean, the full range of imagination is open here. Whatever, but the European Union should engage more in these youth culture and popular culture. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have to invent Europe again. And France and Germany must be the driving forces, because there is no other driving force. That's the problem. If our two countries are not fully engaged for Europe, Europe is in serious trouble. For Germany, this means we have to get over our problem with the money. But on the other side, there is also a big challenge for France. It's sovereignty. This is closely connected, ladies and gentlemen. So we should be frank as good friends, sitting together, putting everything on the table, and then try to find solutions. And I think these solutions are possible if France and Germany are working for such solutions. If not, don't fool yourself. The euro without mutualization of debt will not survive. And there will be no mutualization of debt without sharing sovereignty, which is needed for the mutualization of debt. This depends on France and Germany. Don't fool yourself. If we lose the euro, the European project will be dead. The common market will be dead. We will have lost an historical project. And we would be blamed for that. And it's not so complicated to move ahead. It needs courage, it needs frankness between friends, and it needs vision. And the vision must be that the Europeans will play a strong role in the 21st century. That we will not be reduced to family-owned small businesses compared to the US, Brazil, China, India, or whatever. That we will master our own destiny. And therefore, we have to develop also a new narrative, and we have to bring the youth back to support Europe and not to reject it. Thank you very much.
Bonjour à tous. Juste,
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to say a few words, and I'd like to say that I have 3 or 4 questions to put to Joschka Fischer, and then afterwards there are some roving mics in the room, and we're going to hand around the mics for those people who want to ask questions, so that we can really have a dialogue here between you and Joschka Fischer. So I'm going to start, and I'm going to put this question in French, Joschka Fischer. Sorry, in English.
Between François and Angela.
I can't tell you what the real problem is because I'm not. I was never present when they had their troubles. But I experienced Gérard and Jacques for 7 years. And at the beginning it was awful. It was terrible. It changed with the Iraq crisis. And after the Iraq crisis, it was a real love affair. But I think the personal side is not so important.
Vraiment? Really?
Really, because what I watched, and I predicted that to Gerhard Schröder, because he started as a Eurosceptic at the beginning, I told him once you are Chancellor, you will cool down, because Chancellor and French President, German Chancellor and French President, will be forced into the direction of cooperation. And yeah, I was right. So from that point of view, think about Nicolas and Angela. I mean, the first 2 years were terrible, as you will remember.
Sarkozy, Nicolas Sarkozy.
Nicolas Sarkozy. And so I wouldn't give too much or think too much about the personal relationship. There is a serious problem between France and Germany, that the issue is not put on the table. The issue of money and sovereignty. This is the condition that the euro will survive. The Germans have to agree to the mutualization of debt. Now, it's easy said. Mutualization of debt, what does that mean? That you will guarantee the debt of other nations. Can you do that on the present structure? No, because you will write checks without knowing what will happen. So if you want to have the mutualization of debt, then you need a common structure of decision making. And this is not a simple issue, because the guarantee of debt is the core sovereignty, or part of the core sovereignty of a nation state. So you have to move in a new direction. And this is the issue between Angela and François. Whether they love them or not, forget it.
Mais on a entendu quand même sur le couple.
But we heard about the Franco-German couple. We've heard a lot about that, and we've heard in what you said earlier on, we heard that you're very concerned about the situation between France and Germany, and the fact that these two countries are the only driving forces possible in Europe, and there are no other driving forces. There's no backup force in Europe apart from France and Germany, and therefore, objectively speaking, the situation is rather difficult, because there's no concession, in fact, between France or Germany, and apparently it's difficult to reach a compromise, or at least in the short term.
Je n'aurais jamais imaginé.
I would never have imagined hear so much concern in your speech. In fact, I'm surprised that you sound so concerned. And if you are so concerned about the status of Europe and the status of affairs between these two driving forces, it must mean that the situation is desperate, no?
No, it's dangerous, not desperate. Dangerous. And it's getting dangerous, more dangerous day by day, as long as these problems are not addressed. It's in politics like when you are dealing with your personal health. It's not going away if you don't address an infection. It's spreading. And the problem in Europe is that we are trying to avoid an open debate and decision making. I think it's doable. It needs courage, but it's doable. By the way, it happened. 50% of that, or even more, has happened. I think the majority in the room haven't realized that. What did our leaders do? Our leaders handed the problem over to the European Central Bank. The president of the European Central Bank, Mario Draghi, is de facto running a European, not central bank only, but also a financial European government. That's not healthy. This will work in the moment of the crisis, but this is not a solution, a sustainable solution. So we have to address these issues, and especially between France and Germany. I don't know whether they do that in the privacy of the Élysée or in the privacy of the Berlin Chancellery. I don't know that. But what I see and hear is voices in France, in Germany, now driven by the election campaign, which are more and more, quote unquote, going into a nationalistic direction, which is completely counterproductive. And I see the situation in the south, in the Mediterranean crisis states. I see the unemployment. I see the weakness of growth in the Eurozone. So if you add up all these issues, I think we are in a very serious situation.
Vous en avez parlé.
So you've talked about this, and you said the word in quotes. In fact, you said that we are truly witnessing the return of nationalism in Europe. Do you really think that's the case?
I don't compare that with the 30s. Do not, I'm not panicking. But what we see is the rise of nationalist voices, parties. Now in Germany, we have the first time also the founding of such a party. Yeah, I don't believe that the majority of our people, neither in France nor in Germany nor wherever in the European Union, are ready to support the nationalists. I'm just the opposite, pretty optimistic. As closer we come to a real decision-making, the nationalistic forces have no offer to make. I don't care whether the nationalists are coming from the right or the left. If we are dealing with Europe, it's all the same. So from that point of view, I mean, ideas like we hear in France that France should leave the euro, or in Germany, Germany should leave the euro. What would that mean? This would mean to destroy the foundations of our wealth, of our welfare state, of our social justice as we are used to it. It's not a real alternative, but they are growing, and this is based on the, allow me to say that, it's a hard word, on the cowardness of the mainstream politician leadership. We have a lack of leadership in all countries.
C'est pour ça que je vous posais la question d'Angela.
This is why I was asking you this question about François and Angela. It's because obviously we need these ideas, we need these fights, we need these struggles, we need these political challenges, and we need them to be taken into account, and we need them to be handled by political leaders who are in power. So it's not to personalize or to individualize the discussion as such, but it's because this history needs all of these stakeholders to play a leading role. But before I hand over to the public here, you said the closer we get to the time when the crisis will become acute or qualified as an acute crisis, then the sooner people will become aware that we need to do something, and people will become aware that the situation is serious now, and therefore we have to look elsewhere than in a nationalistic approach. So I know that you can't predict what's going to happen in the future, but when do you think this awareness will actually happen? Is it after the German elections? Is it going to happen in 2013, in 2014? When will people become aware that we have to do something? When will the turning point come?
Now I have to make an honest limitation. What I'm saying now is only about Germany, because in a serious way I can't speak about French politics. I'm not an expert in French politics or Italian or Greek or whatever. What I know is German domestic politics. And therefore, from the German, based on my experience from the German point of view, I have a lot of discussions with a more conservative business-based audiences, smaller business people, well, very conservative, or a business-friendly liberal audience, very skeptical, and mutualization of debt is like Dracula is coming into the room, yeah? And loud screaming and whatever. You can imagine that. But explaining why we need Europe, explaining also the global situation, and this is a key factor. I'm traveling a lot to Asia and America, and again, I think, why are my countrymen and women not with me? If you are one trip to Shanghai or to Seoul, and you will ask yourself, wow, I ask myself, do we need really Europe? And the answer there is definitely yes. And this is not a German problem or a French problem. This is a common problem in the 21st century. So from that point of view, when I explain that to these audiences, then the acceptance even of tough decisions like mutualization of debt, like transfer of sovereignty, starts to become accepted, even in a very conservative audience. So for Germany, based on my experience and my also biographical experience, if we would have a serious decision about doing this and moving ahead with Europe in a referendum, 2/3 of German minimum will vote yes. But again, this will need a new political structure. Not going back to Maastricht, because with Maastricht, no mutualization of debt. This must be pretty clear. We shouldn't fool ourselves about that.
Question de votre part, madame.
Are there any questions in the room? Yes, there's a lady in the room who would like to ask, sorry, a gentleman who is holding the microphone already. So let's hand over to the gentleman. Joschka Fischer. So I'm a Bulgarian journalist. I have two questions to put to you. Allow me maybe three questions, but I'm just happy if I could get the two questions in. And even if I can put my questions with only one answer, that would be very good. Now, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, you had a lot of contact with my native country, which is Bulgaria. I want to know what your opinion is and what your prognosis is with regard to the future of Bulgaria in the family of Europe. That's the first question. The second question is in the 12th May, on the 12th of May in Berlin, you made a speech where you were talking about Quo Vadis Europe, and you were talking about the fact that Europe was created for 6 members, and now there are many more members, and you concluded that the problem came from the fact that it was created for 6, and now there are a lot more than 6 members. So I'm not pessimistic, but we need to take stock at the situation. We need to realize that the more people that belong to Europe, the more problems we have. So in fact, you limited yourself to 2 questions. Yes, we have to limit ourselves.
Well, first of all, I think Bulgaria must continue and developing its economy, its social structure, its democracy. It's not an easy way to go. There are setbacks, but I think that's the only positive future for the country, and they should continue. There is, I think, an impressive democratic stability. You had several changes based on elections, but the country is moving ahead. It's in the whole of the Balkan regions. I said before, I don't see the risk of a war. I must add, with one exception, in the Balkans, I wouldn't give a guarantee for that if Europe will fail, because you can see in the Balkans that the European Union is still a project of peace and peacemaking. It's very important, and you can discuss about whether Turkey is part of Europe, yes or no, but you can't discuss that the Balkans is part of Europe. This is a European region and played a decisive role in the European past. We shouldn't forget that. This was a zone of conflict where many European conflicts started. Therefore, our commitment as Europeans to the Balkans is extremely important, and we cannot deny that. Now,
sur le nombre d'États membres,
about the number of member states that he was talking about, he had a second question regarding the number of member states.
The number of member states. It's very simple, ladies and gentlemen. It's easy, or by and then there is wishful thinking in politics. So it would be easier if only 10 would be members. But what would happen with the others? The decision about enlargement took place not made by politicians, but made by history in the night of November 9th, 1989, when the wall came down. Do you seriously think it would be a good idea to have Hungary with Prime Minister Orban outside of the European Union? Do you seriously think to have Bulgaria, Romania, some other in Central Eastern Europe and Southeastern Europe outside of the European Union? If you understand a little bit about Russian diplomacy, you would immediately say, no, it's not a good idea. It's better to have them in. And therefore, this is Europe, this is diversity, and this is also responsibility. And I think more or less the European Union and the Europeans have done it well. It was a question of history. If you would ask, would you do it again? Yes, definitely. Because the alternative would be a zone of insecurity, of European states which are not belonging to the European Union between Russia and Europe. And this is a recipe I really don't like. Therefore, I would do it again.
Madame, au deuxième rang, et puis monsieur.
There's a lady on the second row, and then there's a gentleman right at the back of the room.
Good afternoon, Mr. Fischer. On m'entend? Oui. My name is Irene Verri. I work for Generation Y, the Euronews TV program on youth. You talked a bit about young people and Erasmus and the high unemployment rates. This year it's also the European citizenship year. So in this context, would you have some advice to young people to fight the crisis? How can young people help Europe help them, if I can say so?
Merci.
Well, my advice would be put pressure on the politicians who are in charge. To be frank, to be honest, and to be courageous to solve these crises. That's, I think, very important. And as more young people are doing that, as more helpful it would be.
Monsieur, tout au fond.
There's a gentleman right at the back of the room.
Qui a le micro?
Who's got the microphone?
Alors allez-y.
The person with the microphone, maybe.
Bonjour.
Hi, my name is Carole Vargebédian, only Lyon ambassador. I have a question is, you spoke about Germany's and France's relationship, and you mentioned the war and everything. And what about the relations between England and France also, which is also as
A mess.
a traditional also a love and hate relationship. And I feel that Europe is also kind of an open menu. Some countries do apply, I mean, for example, England doesn't have the euro, doesn't apply the euro, but so my question is, at which right speed should Europe form? and what is the right speed to add all those countries together. And the second question is a little like the other person mentioned. Shouldn't we work outside of the political arena, sort of, and just let the people do Europe and then add the political level on it?
Well, let me start with your second question. As more as the people are engaged in the European issue, and even if it's a debate between pro-Europeans and anti-Europeans, a debate for me is always better than silence. It would be extremely helpful, and therefore I'm not only pessimistic about this debate. Everywhere in Europe, Europe is the big issue. Only in election campaigns, in the French presidential election, Europe was only done by Mélenchon and Madame Le Pen, but not by the two major parties. And now in Germany we experience the same. Yeah? That the mainstream parties think, oh, it might be dangerous or whatever. I think it's part of the problem. It must be addressed because every European is discussing this issue nowadays. It's also about the future of jobs, economic growth, the future for the next generation, whatever. So from that point of view, it's good. But you need leadership. It's an illusion to believe that the people will do that by itself or by themselves. You need leadership. You need strong influence on the decision-making bodies and on the political leaders. What was the first question?
Redites? Oui,
England,
the rhythm.
Yeah. So, well,
the speed.
If you look to the three big nations, the biggest nations inside the European Union, they are all more or less on the same track. It just in different forms. And this I call isolationism. The reaction of the British, French, and German is an isolationist one. The Brits think Europe, it's a burden, let's leave, and let's create in the middle of the Atlantic a huge super Hong Kong. I think this is a big mistake, an illusion. The French think we are living in the best of all worlds, beautiful La France, why should we change? And I understand that, by the way. I like it here in France.
Et les Allemands pensent quoi alors?
What do the Germans think about it?
And the Germans think, don't touch our money, let us work hard and export. Let us alone. So all the three are on the same trip, turning away from the reality. But this is dangerous, ladies and gentlemen, especially for great nations in the framework of the European Union. So from that point of view, I think that it depends on France and Germany. Unfortunately, the Brits have opted out. So it will depend on our two nations. And the speed depends on the crisis. I'm pretty pessimistic about the upcoming months that the pressure from the crisis will be very, very high. And if this can be combined with political pressure on the leaders now to move and make things going and not thinking about their personal perspective, but about the perspective of Europe and their nation, I think then we can make progress.
S'il y a des eurosceptiques, voire des europhobes dans la salle,
Eurosceptics in this room or Europhobics in this room who want to take the floor, maybe. There's a guy over there in green. I'm not sure if he's either Eurosceptic or a Europhobic. So for 30 years now, I've been working for a public broadcaster radio in Cologne in Germany, so I have a bit of hindsight with regard to the French-German relationship. And I tend to be a bit more positive about things because Joschka Fischer, even if he's right with regard to the current concerns in relation to Europe, we have to to recognize that there are some Franco-German exchanges which today are very rich and work very well, particularly when we think about what's going on in terms of popular culture, and when you think about what's going on in terms of music, the film industry, literature, theatre. There are a lot of things going on, and in the last 30 years I've seen some big developments in this Franco-German relationship. We have mutual respect, we have mutual trust. Sometimes it's mutual love, if you like, which we all do feel. Recently the German football team played in the French stadium and they beat France, and there weren't any riots, I don't think, and there were no armoured cars going to the border of Germany to fight with Germany. So there is this Franco-German friendship which is very deep-rooted now. But however, I'm very surprised right now by the positions I hear taken by a lot of politicians, and in fact these politicians are not extreme politicians by any means, who throw out in the public field all of this disdain with regard to what's going on in Germany. They talk about the economy, money, currency. Joschka Fischer, do you have an answer to give to all of these people who are very disdainful about Germany, who are very intelligent and very cultivated, and who have these great responsibilities, but who over time are trying to destroy or disturb everything we've built up over the years between France and Germany, and somewhere along the line are creating upheavals in this unity? Are you thinking about any specific names when you say these very intelligent people who are criticizing what's going on in Germany? Well, we're in Lyon, so maybe you can't answer that question. Well, I know there's a president of the Senate in France, if I remember correctly, who had a very brutal comment about the German attitude. Now, I know there are some problems between France and Germany, but sometimes they were very injurious about Germany, and they criticized Germany.
We had on the other side Bruno, who is publicly criticizing France in I think, very stupid way. Now, I'm not so upset about the guy because my impression is that he's not a genius. So, in a moment of crisis, a lot of nonsense is also said by people who want to be in the media or whatever. We shouldn't take that too serious. But I agree 100% what you said, that the Franco-German relationship today is better than ever from people to people. No question about that. But there is no guarantee that this will continue, and the moment when the framework will be destroyed. That's the problem. And I'm not concerned about a return of hate and violent confrontation between our two nations. I'm concerned that after this will happen, we pay the price together and will blame ourselves together because we lose together. That's the real threat. So from that point of view, yes, I agree 100%. What Adenauer and de Gaulle started is a great success story, a unique success story if you know the last 200 years of Franco-German relationship before Adenauer and de Gaulle. And we should preserve that. But if the political framework will disintegrate, I think this will be a common defeat, a disaster, endless disaster.
Vous nous faites peur encore une fois.
Scaring us again here, Joschka. It seems like you're enjoying scaring us here, but anyway. Okay, can you say? Can you cheer us up a bit here? You're saying if this happens, the disaster. So. What's another discourse about Europe?
Well, my position is dialectical because I'm so concerned. I'm also optimistic that it won't happen because the president and the chancellor, at least they have an emotional understanding of the dimension of the crisis. And they know if they allow the euro to disintegrate, the next day they are politically dead and they will be blamed as the biggest historical disaster in the European and national history, because the day after will be completely different. So from that point of view, I don't want to scare you. It's a wake-up call. I'm serious. I think we are moving in a very, very dangerous situation. And the only force who can change that is Germany together with France, or France together with Germany, which, whatever you like, I'm fine with. We have to do that together. But it's meant not to shock you, but to wake you up.
Mission accomplie. Micro.
Okay, well, you certainly achieved that. You've woken us up here.
On parle de crise à longueur de journée, mais ne serait pas plutôt une guerre
So we talk
économique?
about crisis, but is it an economic war at the same time when you talk about a crisis, political crisis? Is it not an economic war as well?
No. I don't see an economic war. It would be too simple. It's the problem is there is a serious conflict of interest. I don't believe that this is a real serious conflict of interest, but it's imagined on both sides that the creditor countries seriously think if they are writing checks, it's gone. And the debtor countries seriously think that they are forced by the creditor countries into austerity. And both sides are right and wrong together. So from my point of view, again, the way forward is to find a solution for the old debt, because Greece, for example, is going deeper and deeper into the secondary debt. It means the old debt, as more as they are saving and the economy is going down, so the old debt is increasing, and the Greeks are paying what they get from the ESM directly to French and German and other European banks. So it's part of the banking crisis. And from that point of view, I think we have to talk about the mutualization of debt. Means that there will be a cut of the old debt. Someone has to pay for that. Who?
L'Allemagne.
No.
Germany?
Not alone. It's not only Allemagne. You will pay too.
I know.
Don't worry.
I know.
Don't worry.
We're all Greeks, you know.
Yeah. So from that point of view, you must also have an idea about the mutualization of the future debt, called Eurobonds. Now for French audience. Germany would be ready, I think. Even very skeptical economic professors, Germany would be ready to move into Eurobonds after the election. If there is a common institution, if there is a guarantee that this is not a carte blanche for creating new national debt. And this is a sovereignty problem, sorry. I must repeat myself. So here we are. And both sides, Germany and France, must overcome their traditional positions. That's a serious political problem at home, I understand that. But there we are. This is the core of the present crisis and the core of the solution.
Je fais juste une toute petite parenthèse avant de vous redonner la parole.
So I'd just like to add something before we take more questions from the audience. You rank very well in the polls in Germany, popularity polls.
accéder
Could you tell us, would you accept political responsibility again sometime soon? And if yes, after what you've just told us about the Eurobonds, that Germany would accept that, is that your feeling, you know, that something you've just, is that a true information or just your feeling?
Excusez-moi, je reprends mon autre casquette.
It's only my feeling.
Donc c'est une information.
No, there is no new information. I'm retired, and I will continue to be retired. I'm out of politics. I'm a citizen of Germany and of Europe. I'm an admirer and friend of France, but I'm a private person. This gives me, gives me the allowance.
You're private till you go public. So
No,
if Angela, puisque Angela gagne toutes les élections, si elle vous dit,
So if Angela Merkel invites you to participate in her government, what would you say?
She will not invite me. Don't worry, she won't. I'm too outspoken about her, too. So I'm a private citizen, of course, with a certain background, with also I'm discussing with a lot of people. And it's not a miracle. It's very simple from my point of view. If you look to the development of the crisis, especially in the European South, if you look to the situation that all the steps which were made now were not bringing down the crisis, think about Cyprus. 0.2%. 0.2% of the annual how you call that in English? GDP.
PIB.
Of the GDP of the GDP of the Eurozone. 0.2%. But how and suddenly the crisis was back. Everybody thought, including Barroso, President Barroso, now the worst is over and we are in smooth waters again. No. Suddenly everything, it was even worse because it was a collapse of trust too. It was bad management, of course, but this reflects that the crisis will not go away until the infection is really addressed and the proper means are implemented.
You said Europe needs a new narrative.
Yes.
So can you imagine Barroso taking Martin Luther King's voice and saying, I have a dream, we'll go to the Eurobonds? Is that the new narrative?
No.
Is that what is going to make us dream and want Europe?
No. Barroso made, I don't want now to be too personal, but I don't believe that President Barroso will make us dreaming. I don't see that. I don't see that.
You have been personal.
And from that point of view, I think the new narrative, we have to develop a European narrative, and this is not...
Yes, but it can be the Eurobonds.
No.
That doesn't make anybody dream, or perhaps
only
you dream, or Mario Draghi, I don't know, not me.
No, me. I'm not dreaming about Eurobonds. This is a political and technical issue, but highly political. But the dream is bringing together in a new form the European member states, that we will be strong enough to defend our interests, our rights, and together with our global partners to decide about the future, not alone, together with our partners. So from that point of view, I think it's a fascinating experience and also a big burden, how to overcome these limits out of the past. You know, as one of the audience said before, between France and Germany, the situation today, you can't compare that with even 1970. You can't compare that. It's so positive, and de facto there are no serious problems. If you look to the trade, I mean, we are the biggest trade partners for each other. It was never as good as today. So from that point of view, extremely positive, but now the old mistrust is coming back, and this makes me very concerned. So from that point of view, we should really think about a new narrative which should be looking to the future and not
in the past
looking back to the past. The past is important to understand the present, but for the future, I think we need some new innovation, some new visions. And this is not a question for politicians. This is a question for intellectuals, for the civil society.
Question dans la salle, et puis on va lever le... Ah, Madame a le micro.
Oui.
Madame a le micro. Allez-y, Madame, allez-y. On
Vous
vous entend
m'entendez?
pas. Ça y est, on vous entend.
Ok. Donc, bon, pour répondre à les questions de Nicolas Demorand tout à l'heure, j'ai voté
So
non à la
I voted no on the referendum, in fact, myself, and yet, but I consider myself a Euro optimist, in fact, very optimist. But what I'm waiting for is a transnational social party, perhaps some are waiting for a transnational liberal party, but I would like to see a party emerge that crosses borders and represents citizens and their desire to overcome these issues, these problems today.
Madam, unfortunately, you voted no. Because I'm 100% sure if we would have had the Constitution, the crisis would have hit Europe too. But we would have acted in a very different spirit of solidarity with the Constitution than now. So, unfortunately, it happened. I deeply regret it, but I can't change it. But we can learn from mistakes of the past, Madame. If next time,
Votez oui la prochaine fois.
we should.
Mais il n'y aura pas de prochaine fois, rassurez-vous.
So, and the transnational, I think it depends on the parties. It would be very easy to have a common platform for the socialists or for the liberals or the Greens or the conservatives, and running on a common European platform and not any longer on national platforms. You could also have a common candidate, whatever. So from that point of view, it depends on the parties.
Qui a le micro? Monsieur
Fischer, bonjour.
Mr. Fischer, like everyone, so we've heard your concern about the future of Europe, but you seem to have hope in the role that culture can play and diversity. And so what I see is something of a contradiction between some things you said, between what you're saying and its form. Why didn't you give your conference in German, sir?
A very technical answer, because the translator is an English-speaking translator, and it was also the understanding that more people will understand English than German.
Gleich.
Okay, next time in German.
Monsieur, et ce sera la dernière question. Le micro est coupé. Non, il était toujours coupé.
L'année prochaine.
So next year,
No, it's working.
it's working. Go ahead.
Bonjour, je suis.
Oh, sorry. Whoops. Wait a minute.
Allez-y, madame. Sincèrement, allez-y. Et monsieur terminera.
Voilà, je suis Blandine Pellissier.
Blandine Pellissier, co-founder of HF Movement, militating for gender equality in art and culture. Now, there was the Renprat report in 2006 and 2009. There's a horrible imbalance in France when you look at artistic scheduling, programming, and responsibilities in cultural institutions. And we gathered this morning with members of civil society from other countries in Europe, and what we see there is a similar problem. When some progress is made, as we saw in Spain and Sweden, by the left-wing governments, they are then challenged when right-wing governments come into power. And I suppose that you know the 10 March Resolution 2009 of the European Parliament, which encourages member states to correct this problem of unequal access and unequal representation. And now I know it's just a resolution. Would it not be time to have more coercive measures at the European level so that we aren't at the mercy of governmental changes in our countries? Thank you for the
in general,
question.
I would say yes, but it's a complicated relationship between decision-making on the level of the Commission and the European Parliament and the implementation on the national level. So I wouldn't, if Europe will go ahead and do that, I think it would be great. But the implementation on the national level needs also action of the national parliaments and national governments. So from that point of view, I would say do it on all levels where you can influence these processes.
Allez, monsieur, dernière question.
I would like to say that next year we will be voting for the European Parliament members, but I expect a failure because, as usual, the French will be on one side, the Germans, everyone on their own side. The laws, our electoral laws are not the same. It's not on the same day. And so, in other words, the French, who are deeply European, will be caught up in their national issues and probably won't go to vote very much. In 2005, if the referendum had taken place in Europe all at the same time, so the French people, the German people, and other peoples had voted at the same time, I think they would have voted for the referendum. But the way it was broken down, well, the French were against Chirac, and so they voted against the referendum. It didn't, and in spite of the fact that meant voting against Europe. And so for you, you've got a lot of charisma, Mr. Fischer, so you need to lead this movement pro-Europe, to promote the European people. I think you have a fine future leading that movement.
Well, as I said before, for me, there is no way back in politics. I don't want to go into the reasons, but there are some very good reasons for that. I don't want to talk about here in the public. So, but from that point of view, I think you are right about what you said about the referendum. I think it was the biggest mistake Chirac made to go for that referendum. It was driven by domestic calculations. I had many friends like you, Madame, from the left who said, no, we voted for Chirac against Le Pen, but this was too much. We won't do that again. So it ended, as we know that, very well. But now we are in a different situation, sir. I agree there is a big risk next year with the European election. Because if the crisis is not addressed properly, the risk that many people will not go to the elections, and the far right and the far left, or the Eurosceptics and anti-Europeans will mobilize their vote, and they will get a very good outcome in relation to the many who are not going to the vote. This is the risk which is created by the mainstream parties. I'm not blaming only one, I'm blaming all the mainstream parties, their silence, their lack of courage to address these issues and to mobilize. There is a serious risk, I agree. And this would be terrible. This would be, again, a terrible setback for the European project. But there is time enough, I think, to address these issues with the parties, the mainstream parties, and the leading politicians. Let's see after the German elections how this will turn out. Now you will ask me what will be the outcome of the German election.
Yes.
I don't know. What I see is...
she will win.
What is she? It's a typical French obsession. That
you don't matter in Germany
no,
about who wins the election?
But this is not a personal election like the French president.
C'est vrai, c'est vrai.
This is the major difference. In France, this is a personal election. In Germany, it's not a personal election. The party constellation is decisive. The chancellor is less powerful than the French president because he's not directly elected. He's elected by the parliament. Therefore, the outcome of the parties is the key question. So I understand the French perspective because you are used to your system. But the German system is very different. And therefore, it's hard to say. It depends on the outcome of the parties. Now, from the present moment, it seemed to be that both sides, left and right, don't have a majority. The left party is, they will supposedly come back into parliament, but there is no option for a coalition with the left party, the Social Democrats, and the Green Party. This will not work. So what is the outcome? The outcome will be, from perspective of today, a change in government, but not a change in chancellorship. Change in government means a grand coalition. That's the perspective. But we have still months to go, and the situation is very volatile, so things can change. We have now a scandal in the Bavarian Christian Democratic Party. Then Bayern München, Uli Hoeneß plays into that. It plays into that. So it's a very volatile situation. It's too early to say, but it's not a personal vote. Don't misunderstand that.
I won't. Thank you very much. Merci infiniment.
Merci. Merci.